Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to do is we're going to discuss development tips and tricks for Azure Logic Apps with Sandro Pereira. Now the tips that we're going to cover include naming conventions, how to set up error handling through the use of configure run after settings, how to get error details in your error handling procedures, how to scale our execution through the use of for each parallelism, fixing API connections, and then also discussing when to use Logic Apps consumption versus Logic Apps standard. Now, all of the links to the blog post that Sandro is going to show are going to be included in the video of the description. So thanks again for checking this out. I hope you enjoy the content, and we'll talk to you later. Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today I'm joined by a special guest who really needs no introduction, but Sandro, welcome to the channel. For those that may not know you, I can't imagine there being anyone, but do you want to just go ahead and just briefly introduce yourself, please?
I can. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. So as you say, my name is Sandro Pereira. I've been in the integration space for almost forever, 16 years ago probably, on the Beanstalk world and now on the Azure integration also. I'm work as at Devscope, and I'm the team leader of enterprise integration at Devscope. So that means that my daily is to work with the integration, enterprise integration, and automation, of course, using Beanstalk servers, Azure integration servers. That is the major stuff that we are doing now, and a little bit of automation also. Yeah, you may know me by the events that we do and my blog, and yeah, it's me.
Yes, thanks for that. And while Sandro might be a little humble, he's definitely one of the most experts in the Microsoft integration space. So pleasure to have you on the channel here today. So what we wanted to do today was talk about some tips. So obviously you've got a lot of real world experience. You're constantly working with clients on both BizTalk and Azure integration services, interfaces, and building out those integrations. And so what we wanted to do today was talk about some of your favorite tips. And I know you've got a few of these staged, so feel free to go ahead and share your screen, and we'll walk through these tips of yours.
Okay, let me share the screen. And the reason I like these small tips is that they are based on real world. And joining all of these small tips that by itself they are not that special, but joining all of them, you will have an enterprise integration, an amazing enterprise integration in a better shape, in a good shape. No, so yeah, one of my these are, we are going to speak about more or less five tips, but one of my major and most important tip, as you may know if you follow me, is about naming conventions. Okay, I'm a little freak about naming conventions. I normally tell that if you hire a developer, a C# developer, or a common language developer, let's call it this way, and if they provide you a source code with var1, function1, in class one, you will fire that after a week or so. It happened in my team. So I recently fired someone because that third time that I told them it doesn't work for me. So if you are that careful in the traditional language, why not having the same on the Logic app and any service on Azure, no? And special on Azure because as a developer, we don't care too much, but the people that are behind the scenes, that are managing all the service, they are the people that are going to spend a lot of time dealing with this, because you are not going to implement a good naming convention. So yeah, naming convention for me is important. I think they describe in a good way. So you know that you are developing a solution today, you have everything in your head, but 1 month later, 2 months later, you completely forgot what you yourself done. Okay, so having a good naming convention will help you read that in a better way and spend less time finding stuff and figure some issues also. Um, and in terms of naming conventions on the Logic app itself, we have at least three topics. We have the Logic app naming convention itself. We have the actions naming conventions, and the more critical one, we have the connectors naming conventions. Okay, so these are kind of the three places that you need to implement a good naming conventions. Starting with the Logic app, so this is the workflow. This is the business logic. If you are working with Logic app consumption, the Logic app consumption is the workflow. So please provide a decent name so you can look to the list of Logic apps and know that, yeah, this is the one I need to work. Of course, there is no rule, as you know. There is no rule for naming conventions. You need to apply your naming conventions and or respect the naming convention of your clients, because sometimes, like me as a consultant, I'm going to a client, I cannot invent my naming conventions. I have to respect them. But the important is to respect something. No, I can give you some examples. And actually, these pictures that you're seeing here, it was my whole Azure subscription that kind of I was doing some POCs and say, okay, access last element, just because I need to put something there. Nowadays, if you go to even on my Azure integrated subscription that is just POCs and samples, you will not find these namings, because even then I was struggling to find, when I was to an event, I was struggling to find what was the Logic app that I want to present. So yeah, I now apply decent naming conventions. I don't know if I have here, but yeah, I have here some examples, and this is something that I use in my real case solutions in clients. I normally start with Logic app, and Logic app means LA means Logic app. Nowadays, I may switch a little by LA means Logic app consumption, LA is HTD, Logic app standard. I have some case of business unit, department, process name, and then the environment. Of course, the environment may be optional because we have the resource group and resource group or subscriptions. And if you have resource group of dev or subscription for dev, it's kind of a duplication of. But even though I like to put the environment, because even if you say you have one subscription to different resource group, production and dev, if you go to the list of Logic apps, at least I know that dev, I don't need to look to the resource group. I know that the name of the Logic app means dev and production. I On this tip, I need to. I'm going to create a new tip on that Logic app naming convention. Focus more about consumption. Consumption is a little different. So the Logic app consumption, I will give you this kind of naming convention also, but on the workflow itself, that is the business logics, I'm going only to the process name, okay? Because I already have the container specific, tell me that this is a dev environment, this is for that business logic and so on and so forth, or department or so, or this kind of stuff. So for the workflow itself, I'm going to put only the process name because I don't see the point of having different names, and even for deployment is way easier than having different names. Another topic is about the actions. And well, I'm fighting these for decades, even in the old days of Beanstalk and now the new days of Logic App. When we create a workflow or previous an orchestration, I see plenty of developers do not changing the names of the actions that you put there, the shapes. Uh, just drag and say transform, and in this case, initialize variable, send an email v2, send him email v2 2, and when you look to that, if you are an outsider or you are doing an assessment and look to that code, to that shape, you cannot read nothing. You have to enter in each specific shape and try to understand what is there. No? So what is the difficulty in rename that action? Say initialize name of the variable. At least I know that. Well, this is uh, that variable, a counter, a support variable, call it whatever you want. Even the variables, you should provide this decent naming convention on that. I know that we have a list of the designer is smart enough to divide and put in a specific place all the variables that you have, but I'm an old guy. I came from old Avid, so all my variables start with bar. That's it. Okay, simple as that. But yeah, if you provide, so this is kind of the default situation where you have when HTTP receive initialize var condition. So by looking to that in a high level situation, you cannot understand nothing. What I say is that put a decent name. I think you have 255 charities to put in that name. So go ahead and use it. Use that. Okay. Probably the only annoying part is that if you are going to code, well, putting that name on the actions is more difficult, and then you have to replace the space with underscore. But yeah, not that critical also. Okay, but at least someone, even the client, even the manager, product group, whatever. Okay, IT guy can go and see. Okay, I'm making a condition, see that if array is empty and I'm sending a mail to notification or something like that, he will understand in a highlight situation that, no? So I go ahead and change that. This is critical for me because, well, again, I'm looking myself in the future, but I also look for the client perspective, and I don't want the client to depend on me to check what is wrong or to understand what is implemented. No, so you should always do this. Now, the more difficult part on the naming convention is regarding this is and again critical for me is the connectors naming convention. You know that by default on the designer you cannot provide a name to the connector. You can provide a display name, but on the list in the portal, you don't see the display name. You see the name of the connector. And by default, is SQL1, Teams1, and so on and so forth, which it's quite annoying in one aspect, but quite difficult to manage it. Because if you want, let's say you have different SQL connectors, if you want to go to that list and see that you know that you need to change something in a specific connection of the SQL, you have to enter one by one if you don't know to see what is the connection. No, if you provide kind of a naming convention saying that, for example, let me show here that is in the end. Connection key vault POC connection blob storage for orphan. Well, it can provide even better, but this is kind of an example. At least if you provide a decent name there, you can easier understand what is there and what is doing. If you are working on the Azure portal, it's quite difficult to do that because you need to create the connector first and then associate the connector on the Logic Apps. But if you are on kind of real enterprise scenarios, you are not going to develop on the portal. You are going to probably develop on the Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, whatever. And there you can easily modify all of these. And when you deploy, you deploy with the correct and good naming conventions. So yeah, in terms of naming conventions, it's more or less like this. It's kind of highlight that you need to be aware of that. You need to provide good naming conventions. Otherwise, you may end up with a situation that after a few months, you are in an uncontrolled situation because you don't know what you have there in an easy way. Okay.
So I guess like to summarize, I guess number one, you don't necessarily have to use your naming convention, but you should have an agreed to naming convention within your organization that's consistent that everyone should follow. I guess number two would be the earlier you implement this, the less painful it is down the road. Like especially whenever I'm doing actions, I will rename it like as soon as I create it because yes, the designer is pretty smart in terms of like updating references. However, when you start to use expressions, that will not get changed. So if I am, rename an action upstream and I'm using an expression downstream, I would have to go manually do that myself. So I'm always like very, I guess much like you, particular about doing that earlier than later. And I totally agree with your last tip, like the connection side of things. Once again, do it up front because once it starts to get to SQL 1, SQL 2, SQL 3, then you're
You
in
are in
for
control.
much more work, much more headache. And it's really low value work at the end of the day, but it is important. So it's just better to do that up front. So yeah, great tips just around naming conventions, like all of those, and could totally relate with them all.
Yeah, and especially if if you do not apply from day zero, and then you want to start apply, you have to redeploy everything with the new naming convention. So it's a lot of work that sometimes it gives you. And if we are speaking about Logic Apps here in our Azure integration service, but we have to look that in general, we are working on Azure. So you need to, you have the subscription name, that's kind of easy, no, not critical, but resource groups. So if you change that resource groups, and probably it's going to give some more workaround in front, and then even if you are going to consumption, then you have computing bases and app service plans and all of these have to have a decent naming convention, no? Because it's not you don't see it in front as a developer of the Logic Apps, but behind the scenes you use all of this stuff. Okay, so yeah, you need to have a good strategy on that.
For sure. All right. So what's the next tip? What do you got
second, error handling. Error handling in Beanstalk. In enterprise integration, error handling is critical. Okay. My integration shouldn't fail. And if it fails, I need to understand why and control of all of these failings. And so how we can do that inside Logic App. And I think that Logic App has an amazing set of features to control all of this. You can actually do a lot of things in a lot of different ways, both on the connectors level, both on the logic inside the business logic inside the workflows. So the default way, all the actions work as a C# code, for example. So on the C#, we execute the first line. If success, go to second line, and so on and so forth. By default, Logic App use the same strategies. So first action successful, go to the second action, and so forth, and so on. So what you can do in a easy situations is kind of and here we have even more availabilities than in C# code is we can set per action the run after settings. So let's say that we have the second shape, instead of being in a function, is logging. Normally, I don't care about logging. If it logs the information, good, I'm happy. Otherwise, I'm not going to abort a process because the log failed. I don't care. Just keep going, because it's more critical for me to enter an order or an invoice in the system than logging that an invoice arrived. So what I can do is saying on the shape below, if the log failed, I don't care. Okay, so I can go and say if successful, as timeout, skip it or fail, the third action will be executed. Okay, this is just to control one action failing. Of course, this is a lot of work and it's not the best solution to do in all scenarios. So the second way for you to control is, and again, to do that, just click on the three dots, configure run setting, configure run after settings, and it's quite easy to do that. The other part is to implement kind of try-catch capabilities like you see in C#. It can be a try-catch or try-catch finally, okay? And we can do that with scopes. Scope is a special action for me. It has many capabilities. It can be for grouping, just to minimize and collapse certain areas of the business logic inside your logic app, or it can serve also as a try-catch finally approach. To do that, you can create the first scope. You put all the actions inside that. You can call that a try scope. Again, provide a better name. That try scope, try something scope. This is something that I do, like, for example, try get configuration variables scope. Okay, I'm going to read configuration from the keyboard or from a database, and if it fails, I'm going to control that. So I'm going to have a catch get parameters scope. And on that catch, I'm going to configure the run after. Then I'm going to say if something fails on the try scope, I'm going to be executed. Otherwise, it's going to be skipped. Okay. So in that case, I'm creating a try-catch capabilities inside the business flow, inside the logic app. As I say, timeout or fail, I want to be executed. If the try was skipped, I'm not going to also enter the catch because, well, if it's skipped, it's not going to execute. I don't have nothing to catch. No? If I want to finally, I can use the same approach. Just below the catch, I'm going to put another scope and again configure the run after settings. And in this case, it's going to be everything, because the final is if the catch was executed, not executed, failed or not, the final will always be executed. That's the concept of that. So select all of these, and then I have this concept of try-catch scope internally. And I also have Logic App also have another capability that is inside the connectors that connect to systems like SQL, Dropbox, whatever. Okay, actions that connect that they are connectors itself. We have the retry capabilities. So when I fail, let's say I'm going to execute the HTTP request. The HTTP gives me a timeout. I don't want to raise, in some cases, I don't want to raise an error back. I want to retry. Instead of doing that inside the business process and put some kind of retry and loops, I can use the settings to control the errors and say if it fails, I want to retry 5 minutes later or 60 seconds later, and the number of retries I want to make. And only after that, let's say 5 times I retry and 5 times fails, I want to raise the error back. So Logic App have all of these capabilities and is really powerful in that. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It is really powerful, and I think, yeah, bringing awareness to this is excellent, because I think there's a lot of sort of patterns you can implement as you described by using configure run after, and you can become quite creative with it as well. And I totally agree. Like the retries is another feature that's really simple to implement, right? You just click on the ellipsis of the action and then configure. There's a few different strategies you can use, whether it's like exponential back off, or if it's just a fixed sort of, choose whichever one best aligns to your requirements. But very good stuff.
Yeah, but this seems to be kind of basics. But I've been doing a lot of training course in the Azure integration space, at least last year. And you will be surprised how many people do not know these kind of capabilities, especially these kind of scope try-catch capabilities. There are still people that implement all the logic without any kind of try-catch, because if it fails, it raises a failure on the run execution. But that's for minor integration scenarios. For critical scenarios, you cannot have these kind of situations. I cannot imagine to have this kind of process to handle invoices or orders. Okay, you cannot get stuck a processing fail, and I need to go to run history and reprocess because that order failed because certain system is down or something like that. You cannot implement this kind of design situations on that level of commitment. And so yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So the next one is what we spoke about, the error handling. So another topic is the the error message. Okay, and you know that I love this tip. In C# code, it's quite simple to do extract the error message. We have the try, we have the catch, and I have an example here. And the catch, we have what is the type of exceptions we want to catch. We can put system exception catch, it catch everything. And then we put exception dot message, and we have the message of the error message. Okay. And why is it important to have the error message? Because I want to be aware when it fails and why it fails. No, I don't want to go back to the run history and say, okay, let me select this run history, and I have to go to the portal. I have to know the run ID. I have to search from the run ID. I have to click on that. Show me the logic of the workflow, and I need to scroll down to see where is the error. Okay, it is good to have all of these, of course, because when you want to go to troubleshoot, you have to do that. But come on, you cannot do that in enterprise level, because, well, you have to dedicate a team of people just to control errors. No, so I want to log in a logging system. It can be application insights, can be custom logging. Well, you decide. Okay, again, each client has his own logging capabilities and solutions in place. We need to adapt to that. Okay, but what is important is to provide saying that there was a failure and this is the failing, and it seems easier, okay, in theory, but in practical, Logic App is more complex on that. So it's not a straightforward operation to get the error message from the Logic App. Okay, if you have simple solutions, when I say simple solution, is everything straight, no conditions, no loopings. Yeah, we have a simple way to to process that, and is using the result function. The result function, you can have, so for example, if I have the try catch, the try scope, and I have a catch, but inside that try, I don't have any conditions. I don't have any loops, no branches, nothing, just action one follow the other. I can use the result action function, and then well, I can filter that based on failures. If it failed, so I use the filter array to filter the result, and you have the try scope is the name of the scope I'm catching the error, no? And I'm filter for failures. So on that array, I'm always going to have the failed passage present. And if I want to get, I can go and get the first message, the first message of that filter array. I can have more, but normally I only have one failure, and it's the first one. So this strategy works fine. It doesn't work every time because, well, Logic App or complex enterprise scenarios doesn't have a straightforward workflow. It has conditions, it has loopings. The problem with this result function is that it only gets the first level. So if you have a condition and something fails inside that condition, you only get the error of the first level, that is the condition itself, the condition action. And normally the error is an operation, a dependence operation failed. This is not the error message. I want to say why it's failing and what is the action that is failing. I want the name of the action because I provide a good naming convention to that action. So I know that I need to go directly to that one. The only solution for now, at least for now, is to use the REST API, Azure REST API. So my approach, and you can have different approach to do that. I choose to use Azure function, but I can replace this Azure function for another Logic app, for example, a child Logic app. I can, and then inside I can do everything and return back the response. Okay, I decide to use a function because it's not that heavier, it's faster, so I'm fine with that. And it's a consumption also, so I pay per use. I hope not have too many errors, so all good on that. And I send to that as a function the run ID, the subscription ID, the resource name, okay, for Logic App consumption. And based on that, subscription ID, Logic App name, subscription ID, Logic App name, resource group, and run ID. And based on that, I have another blog post. You can go there later on. I think Kent will put some links there. And basically, what I'm going to do is just doing a REST call to the REST APIs of Logic App, and I'm going to get the run history, the whole run history of the Logic App, similar to what you are seeing the porting with all the actions that were run, selected, fail, and so on. I'm going to have these, but in a JSON format, not in a visual way. And then on that as a function, I'm going to clean up and extract only the fail message, and I'm returning the fail message back again. So it's kind of the same situation, but I need a different strategy to get the correct error message, and then you will have it, everything that you need to log on your systems. And well, it's a little annoying to do this workaround, but the funny way is that you do it once, and you can use it in all Logic apps that you want. The only way then is that you need to give Logic App operator permissions on the resource group that Logic App has to read from the run history. part of that is the same. Logic app consumption, it is the same. Logic app standard, it is the same strategy, but the REST API is a little bit different. Soon I'm going to post on my blog also that strategy.
So very cool. So I think for listeners, I think the previous tips around exception handling and scopes and configure run after, and then combine it with this of getting the details for those errors, especially when you've got those more advanced scenarios, is sort of a great complementary tip. So something that all of you folks should be sort of thinking about as you're building out your logic apps. Good stuff.
And you see that combining these three tips, you are starting to create a good integration scenario, because naming the name of the actions, then the scopes, and getting the message and getting the error and the name of the action, you have in a good solution then.
Yeah,
sorry,
we saw that.
Just like it just ended me.
We saw that with the result expression where you had to plug that in. That was another example of naming properly up front, and then you can easily go ahead and reference them, because you don't want to be having to go after the fact and redo things. So
exactly. So next one.
Sure, let's do it.
For each parallelism, this is something that exists. This is amazing, and people tend to forget about this. Okay, so by default, when you are going to do some loopings, it has a default parallelism on that. So actually, Logic App is not going. You have a for each, so the idea that you have is going one by one. Logic App doesn't do that. Actually, you do several at the same pace. You are not aware of that, but it does. And by default, it's 20. Okay. If you go to other Power Automation, I think is 1, but Logic App is 20, which is good because it's faster. Okay. But there's a big but. Normally, there are some old environments that cannot handle that request volume. Okay, and they say 20. Come on, Sandro, 20 is nothing. Yeah. Sometimes it's too much. Okay, we need to slow down, or yes, we need to. It supports more. We go faster. To be honest, but you are there to confirm. I think the maximum is 100. I don't know.
I believe it's 50. I want to say it's 50 is the max. I could be wrong, but I believe it's 50. But you're right about the default, and you're right about Power Automate. I was going to bring that up. It's different. It is sequential by default, but it
by default
is scale out as well. Yeah.
But you can also do the same strategy. So all of these, we are speaking about Logic App, but all of these tips applies to the same Power Automate, because behind the scenes they are the same. Okay, so for each parallelism, you can have these. You can have these in the triggers, and you can have these also in the condition in loops, because I believe, and I'm speaking I was just reminding a scenario that I pull data from service bus, some message, and you can also define these how many messages that you pull. But I think it's not called for each parallelism, but it's something related. So trees also have these kind of features, but it's not calling the same name, but it's more or less the same. In terms of for each, yes, we have these, and it's quite easy. You go to the kind of 3 dots, and you have this concurrency control. Exactly, this is the name. And you have concurrency control on the triggers, and you have concurrency control on the for each, on the loops. And yeah, by default is 20, and you can upscale, or you can slow down all of these and apply, and that's it. Because yeah, sometimes you may see that this is slow. You can, why is taking 5 minutes to process all of these? Well, probably you can have more horsepowers, and you can scale up these, and and then instead of waiting 5 minutes to finish all of this process, you will finish in less than a minute. Or yes, you're starting to get more timeouts, then you go and slow down all of things that is inside that for each, and that's it. I think it's quite powerful doing that, so yeah, take a look on that. All these kind of for each has all of these concurrency control, and even some triggers have this concurrency control that you can set up and apply, because yeah, even pulling data from service bus, well, probably don't want to pull one each time. You can pull 20, but 20 at the same time, different kind of debatch that in 20 different processes, but give me 20 messages at one time, because I can be faster than one. Okay? So yeah, it's important for you to know.
On the trigger side, I believe it's called split on, and certain connectors will support it. And especially if you're getting kind of like an array of messages, you can provide like your expression that will basically sort of break it down. But yeah, once again, quite powerful, especially like, as you said, it's kind of like a debatching type feature. You get a batch of messages, but they need to be processed individually. So instead of like looping through things, you can say just debatch, I'll deal with them one by one, and then each one will instantiate their own instance of the workflow and then basically execute.
Exactly. And the batch is something that is also supported in Logic App. I'm going to create in the future also these, because yes, you can receive a SOAP and debatch that message and separate on the entry point for each different Logic Apps, and not process one batch inside a Logic App, because yeah, you know that in these scenarios you are going to have low latency, more latency on that, because yeah, you have to cycle that, and if you are going to cycle, you are going to spend more time than debatching at the entry, and you have parallel processing. Okay, so yeah, yeah, that's everything for the parallel, and then go to the connectors again, and special fix the connectors. I normally tell, and it's unfair, but I normally say that connectors is the weak point of the Logic App. Okay, it's a little bit unfair of that, but it's just for people to understand that they are the critical part of that. Because if you are going to communicate with the system, it's not the workflow that communicate, it is the connector. That's critical. Okay, and most of these or some connectors, special kind of office connectors, new fancy way of communication with tokens, it has an expiration date. Okay, it's nothing bad. It's good. Okay, it's secure. You can set up that this token is going to expire for a year, something like that. But some of them expire. The problem is that people tend to forget that they need to monitor all of this stuff. Okay, and I speak for myself also, because I've been there in this situation, and even this week I face this problem. No, if you don't actively monitoring these API connections, you will at some point, for example, the Power BI connected, the Teams connector, the Outlook connector is going to expire the token, and then you need to do authorization again. Okay, authorize, go to the portal, say, authorize, put your credentials, and then again you have 1 year again without any problem. For example, last week someone removed the license from the service users that was calling Teams, and everything stopped break on that connector. So the Logic App was good. The logic inside the Logic App was amazing, but the connector was not working. Okay, and what is important? So, and in this case was notifications. We are sending notification. We are using a strategy for sending notification by email, but in some cases it's too many emails, and you know that when you receive too many emails, you create a rule saying go to that folder, and no one look to that folder. So we create an approach that we are sending critical message by email, but kind of the warnings we are putting on team channels, and that people have access to that team channels and going to be notified. So kind of an easy way not people to create rules to clean that emails, because in some cases we get 100 notifications in a single period of a small period of time, and we are not getting notifications. And actually, we had a breakdown on our system because we were not aware that the importation was failing. So it was the business that was calling us to say that this is not working. And then we had to spend one day fixing all of this stuff because the team channel was not working. That's why I say this is the weak point of. So you have to actively monitoring that, and again, there is no good way to do that at the moment. So you can have different strategies. You can create PowerShell scripts. I use an automation account with PowerShell scripts to get the list of API connectors, see the states of them, and actually call a Logic app to send me notifications, the different notifications, some that doesn't expire. But yeah, you have to look on that. And it's normal for you to go to that Logic Apps and you see that it is expired. It all normally happens because I have a lot of Logic Apps, for example, using Power BI dashboards, and I don't use it often. And without use, that token will go into expired. If you use often, the token is refreshed, so it's not going to have a problem. But if you spend like half a year without calling to that connector, it's probably going to be broken after that period. And when I go to do an event, I always try and it's failing, and the problem is the connector is not active. I'm just going there and authorize and so on and so forth. But in this case, for example, notification is something that is not going to happen too often. We hope that never receive a notification, but when we receive a notification, we have to make sure that is active to receive the notification. So yeah, go and implement some monitoring capabilities inside the API connectors to see what is broke, what is orphan, because in some cases you just create connectors and you don't know what is going to be used, what is in use or not. And by using kind of PowerShell, you can do this cleanup and these monitoring systems, and then fix this connector. Okay.
So yeah, no, it's good to proactively do this. I think it's a good idea. Like maybe just a little bit more info on sort of connections and so yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like we're using Azure AD like OAuth to connect basically tokens. And so that simplifies authentication, which is great. But what typically happens in my experience, both Power Automate and Logic Apps works the same way, is that
Yeah.
due to inactivity, these tokens can expire. And that, some people don't know this, but like that's very much a organization by organization configuration. There's some companies that feel like having a shorter token life is a more secure approach, which isn't necessarily true. There's actually some blog posts out by the Azure AD team sort of refuting that. And especially when you have things like MFA and stuff like that, where like you've got sort of a challenge mechanism to basically secure things regardless of the duration of the token. And then you're right, like as you say, use that connection as part of a connector call, it gets refreshed. And so that's what's happening here is that due to inactivity, basically Azure AD will basically expire that token because that's the default behavior. And then, so as a result, that connection's now essentially broken and has to be reestablished. So it's like someone putting in their credentials once again so that you've got a refresh token. So I've seen some people almost have like a little bit of a heartbeat, like if there's specific connectors where they know they may not be used frequently and they want to avoid this. They might have like a recurring, say, logic app or workflow that will go ahead and obviously you don't want to be creating data, but maybe you're reading data and you're using that connection. You can kind of keep it alive
Keep it
and
alive.
sort of ensure that like you're not going to run into these scenarios. But I think in the absence of that, you proactively using PowerShell to see what's broken is another like viable strategy as well.
Well, I normally use our automation account with PowerShell there, and it works fine for me. So again, you may find a lot of ways to do that. This is a way. But yeah, this is something that when I arrive to a company, I'm out of control. Okay, I cannot go there as a consultant and say, "Oh, we are going to use the Teams, and you have to give me a token that never expires." I said, "No, you can't." So it has an expiration of 15 days. Use it, otherwise it's something that you cannot control. In the only way is for you to monitoring that solutions and art beating and all of these strategies. All style in a different way.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And last and not least, Logic App standard, Logic App consumption. Okay, something that Logic App consumption standard is the new type of Logic Apps. When I say the new, is the recent one because it has almost 1 year or more. That is on GA. So, but it's also caused some confusions about naming. Actually, Microsoft did a decent job in renaming Logic App for Logic App Consumption and Logic App Standard. But now people say what to use, when to use, what is consumption, what is the difference between consumption and standard? No, and well, you have to know the basics. So what is a Logic App consumption and what is a Logic App standard? And basically, consumption is a serverless. Okay, is the old way to do Logic App is completely serverless, managed by Microsoft. Okay, and it has a lot of capabilities. You can do whatever you want there, but you cannot use it, for example, on premise. So if you want to do on premise to on premise integration, you have to go to the cloud and go back to on premise. Okay, because serverless on the cloud. Okay, and for that reason, and main reason, a lot of reasons, so, Microsoft decided to create Logic App Standard. Logic App Standard is different. It is the same concept, but different implementation. It has a different engine. It runs on top of Azure Function runtime. Logic App Consumption has a different runtime. It's Logic App runtime. I don't know what's the internal name of that engine, but it is a Logic App engine. It can work virtually everywhere, on premise, on the cloud. It is a compute-based solution also because it's run on the Azure function, but it needs an app service hosting plan for that. Logic App standard. So the Logic App consumption, it is the workflow, it is the business logic. The Logic App standard, it is the application, I don't want to call function app, but when you create a function app, you create an application and then you create the functions. This is the same because we are running inside the function runtime. So you create a Logic application, and then inside of that you can create, and Microsoft renamed that because then it was Logic App, to workflows. Okay, so the workflows inside the Logic App standard, it is the business logic that you are going to implement. And in that, you also have these stateless workflow and stateful workflows. Stateless is to run faster. Okay, it doesn't have a run history. It's just one kind of try and forget scenarios, and we want fast response. Okay, the stateful is the equivalent of Logic App standard consumption. Sorry. It has all the run history, persistence, and so on and so forth. Okay. Apart of that, they have the same goals. They are not yet on the same capabilities because they are a small gap that Microsoft is closing very fast, but we have a different price modeling, and the rest is the same. So if you ask me when to use one or the other advantage and so on and so forth, it depends on your scenarios. Okay, if you want to say I want to use a Logic app, what you want, what I need to use, you have to analyze your current challenge and apply one or the other if it fits better. If you say that, and you shouldn't choose, I'm going to use Logic App Standard and only use Logic App Standard, okay? For me, it's a nonsense to do that. You want to have a mix of them. If you want to do cloud-to-cloud integration, it's not a heavy volume of data. Use a consumption. If you want this kind of ticketing, then you have an event, but it happens once a month. Use consumption because you pay for that small amount. Okay, it's make more sense for me. Okay, if you want to do now, I want to have BNet capabilities. Everything has to be kind of on-premise level. No one go outside can call this. You have to go to standard. If you want to say, I want to execute locally, I don't want to do on-premise to on-premise, go for standard, okay? Because consumption is not on-premise, it's hybrid, okay? On-premise, cloud, on-premise, it's a hybrid integration. So depending on your scenarios, you have to know that I'm going to select one or I'm going to select the other. And even the Logic App consumption, the Logic App Standard can call the consumption, and the consumption can call the Logic App Standard. You can do a hybrid mix, okay? It's up to you. It's up to the scenario. There is no kind of rule that is say, yeah, you have to use this or you have to go that one, and no one is going away. Logic App consumption is not going to be removed from the list of services that Microsoft has. It's going to continue to have consumption and standard. That's the point. So use according to your scenario.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I think the big thing is, as you mentioned, is just like using requirements to drive that decision. Because while like they do achieve the same goal generally, like there are some sort of differences from an implementation, and that's where it's important to understand what those differences are. And it looks like you've covered, many of those aspects in this post. So would encourage folks to read through it and look at it. Also on my channel, there's a video around the connectors. There's definitely some nuances when it comes to connectors between standard and consumption. And I'll link that video in addition to all of these tips in the video description so folks can have a look at that.
But you can use all the connectors that is on Azure inside the Logic App Standard also, if you want.
Correct. Yeah. So what we would call like the Azure or managed connectors are all available inside a standard. And then in some cases, there's two different flavors of a specific connector. So say SQL will exist in both as a built-in plus as an Azure or managed connector as well. So there's some things to learn for people to understand from that perspective as well. But with that, Sandro, I want to thank you for spending time with us going through these tips. I think these are super valuable for folks and encourage you to take a look, read, listen, understand, and then choose where you want to apply them. But some solid advice here from one of the experts in the Microsoft integration space. So thanks, Sandro.
Thank you again for having me here. Yeah, see you.